He thought the woman standing beside the designer baby crib was still the same broke girl he had abandoned years ago, but before this day was over, everyone inside the luxury store would learn a lesson about dignity they would never forget. Jasmine Carter's fingers rested gently on the polished edge of a handcrafted nursery crib displayed beneath warm crystal lights. The crib was beautiful, made from white oak with delicate details carved into every corner, the kind of piece most parents only admired from a distance. Around her, the boutique shimmered with quiet wealth. Soft music drifted through the air. Glass shelves displayed luxury baby products that cost more than some families spent in a month. The store sat in the heart of downtown Chicago, where success was measured by the logo on your shopping bag and the watch on your wrist. Jasmine stood alone among the displays, one hand resting protectively on her pregnant belly. Her dark curls were pulled back neatly, and her simple cream-colored maternity dress looked elegant without trying to impress anyone. She wasn't searching for attention. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply looking at the crib with a small smile that reached her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful about the future. Then a familiar laugh shattered the moment. The sound hit her before she even turned around. Some voices never truly leave your memory. Jasmine's smile faded. Her shoulders stiffened. Slowly, she looked toward the entrance. Brandon Mitchell walked into the boutique with a blonde woman hanging on his arm. He wore an expensive navy suit and the confident grin of a man who believed the world existed for his entertainment. The moment his eyes landed on Jasmine, he stopped walking. Surprise flashed across his face. Then amusement. Then something far uglier. "Well," Brandon said loudly enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "Look who it is." Several customers glanced over. Jasmine lowered her eyes briefly and took a slow breath. She had hoped she would never see him again. Brandon approached with deliberate confidence. His companion looked Jasmine up and down before her gaze settled on the pregnancy. "You know her?" the woman asked. Brandon laughed. "Unfortunately." The word hung in the air like an insult. Jasmine remained silent. Brandon circled the display slightly, examining her the way someone might examine an old photograph from a life they thought they had outgrown. His eyes moved from her modest dress to her worn handbag and finally to the luxury crib beside her. "Wow," he said with a chuckle. "You still have expensive taste." A few people nearby smiled awkwardly, sensing tension but not understanding it. Jasmine kept her voice calm. "I'm just looking." "Looking," Brandon repeated. "That's probably all you can do in a place like this." His girlfriend laughed immediately. The sound echoed far louder than it should have. Jasmine felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she refused to react. Brandon leaned closer to the display tag and read the price. His eyebrows shot up dramatically. $12,000 for a crib, he announced. "Jasmine, you couldn't afford lunch at places like this when we were together." More heads turned now. The boutique suddenly felt smaller. Jasmine's hand instinctively moved across her stomach. She wasn't embarrassed for herself anymore. She was protecting her peace. Brandon mistook her silence for weakness. "Let me guess," he continued. "You came in here hoping someone would mistake you for a customer." His girlfriend smirked. "That's actually kind of sad." Jasmine slowly lifted her gaze. There was pain in her eyes, but there was also something Brandon didn't recognize anymore. Confidence. The kind that didn't need approval. The kind that didn't need to win arguments. For a brief second, something about her composure unsettled him. Then he laughed again, louder than before. Around them, the store fell strangely quiet as more people stopped browsing and began watching. And standing in the center of that beautiful boutique, surrounded by strangers and judgmental stares, Jasmine Carter said absolutely nothing. Brandon's laughter echoed through the boutique, but Jasmine barely heard it anymore. The sound seemed distant, buried beneath memories she had spent months trying to leave behind. There had been a time when hearing his voice could brighten her entire day. Back then, she had believed promises were meant to last. Back then, she had believed love was stronger than fear. 6 months earlier, life had looked very different. Jasmine had been working double shifts at a small community health clinic on the south side of Chicago. The pay was modest, but she loved helping people. Every morning, she left her apartment before sunrise, carrying a cup of coffee and a list of goals she hoped to accomplish before turning 30. Brandon had often joked that she worried too much about the future. He was charming when he wanted to be. Ambitious. Confident. the kind of man who always seemed certain that bigger opportunities were waiting just around the corner. Jasmine had admired that confidence. She had imagined building a life beside him. For nearly 3 years, they talked about dreams together. A house with a backyard, family holidays, children running through the grass on summer afternoons. Ordinary dreams. Beautiful dreams. Then everything changed with a single doctor appointment. Jasmine still remembered the way her hands trembled as she stared at the positive test result. She had been nervous, but she had also been happy. Excited. She spent an hour rehearsing how she would tell Brandon. She imagined surprise turning into joy. She imagined him smiling. Instead, she found a man she barely recognized. Brandon sat across from her in a crowded coffee shop, staring at the table long after she finished speaking. The silence stretched between them. Finally, he leaned back and rubbed his temples. "This is not part of my plan," he said quietly. Jasmine thought he only needed time to process the news. She reached for his hand. He pulled it away. The movement hurt more than she expected. "Brandon, I am finally getting opportunities," he interrupted. "I cannot be tied down right now." Jasmine felt the room spinning around her. "This is our child." He looked away toward the window. "I am not ready for this." Over the following weeks, his calls became shorter. His messages became less frequent. Excuses replaced conversations. Distance replaced affection. Then one afternoon, he stopped responding altogether. Jasmine waited days before accepting what had happened. The man who once promised to stand beside her had simply walked away. The months that followed tested every ounce of strength she possessed. Medical appointments, rent payments, long nights spent wondering how she would manage everything alone. Yet somehow she kept moving forward. Every challenge taught her something Brandon never understood. Strength did not always look loud. Sometimes strength looked like waking up and trying again when nobody was there to help. Sometimes it looked like carrying hope when disappointment would have been easier. Back in the boutique, Jasmine slowly returned to the present. Brandon was still speaking, still performing for the small crowd gathering around them. He thought he knew her story because he knew her past. What he did not realize was that the woman standing before him was no longer the woman he had abandoned. And that difference was about to matter far more than anyone in the store could imagine. Brandon sensed the attention gathering around him and seemed to enjoy every second of it. The small crowd that had formed near the nursery displays gave him exactly what he wanted, an audience. He straightened his expensive jacket and smiled as though he were performing on a stage. "You know what?" he said loudly. "I am feeling generous today." Jasmine remained still. The polished floor reflected the warm chandelier light above them. And for a moment the boutique felt less like a store and more like a courtroom where strangers were silently deciding who deserved respect. Brandon stepped toward the crib and glanced at the price tag again. $12,000, he repeated. "That is more than some people make in months." His girlfriend laughed beside him. Maybe she is hoping for a discount. A few uncomfortable smiles appeared among nearby shoppers. Others simply watched. Nobody said a word in Jasmine's defense. Brandon shook his head dramatically. "You always dream too big." He looked around at the crowd. "Trust me, I know her." The statement carried an arrogance that made several people lean closer. Brandon loved being the man with the story. She always wanted things she could not afford. Jasmine slowly drew a breath. She could feel every eye in the boutique resting on her. Still, she refused to argue. Her silence only encouraged him. "Actually," Brandon continued, "I should help you out." He reached into his pocket and removed a sleek black credit card. The gesture was deliberate, performative. His girlfriend's smile widened immediately. "That is sweet," she said. Brandon walked toward the sales associate standing nearby. The young woman looked uncertain but stepped forward. "Go ahead," Brandon announced. "Put the crib on my card." The associate blinked. "Sir, I said I will buy it for her." He turned back toward Jasmine with a smug expression. "Consider it charity." The words landed harder than any insult he had delivered so far. A quiet murmur spread through the boutique. Jasmine felt her stomach tighten. Not because she needed the money. Not because she could not afford the crib. But because Brandon still believed kindness was something you performed to make yourself look superior. "That is not necessary," Jasmine said calmly. Brandon laughed. "Come on. Do not be proud now." His girlfriend folded her arms. Honestly, she should be grateful. The associate looked from one person to another, clearly uncomfortable. Brandon placed the card on the counter anyway. "Ring it up." Jasmine lowered her eyes briefly. She remembered all the nights she had worried about paying rent, all the moments she had felt alone. Brandon thought those memories defined her. What he failed to understand was that surviving difficult seasons had changed her in ways money never could. Across the store, an older customer watched Jasmine carefully. There was something unusual about the woman's expression. Not pity, not judgment, recognition. Meanwhile, Brandon continued smiling, completely unaware that every word he spoke was pushing him closer to a truth he was not prepared to face. Jasmine looked at the credit card resting on the counter and then at the sales associate, whose nervous smile had completely disappeared. The young woman seemed trapped between professional courtesy and growing discomfort. Around them, the atmosphere inside the boutique had shifted. What had started as curiosity was slowly becoming judgment. People always wanted a story, and when they did not know the truth, they invented one. Brandon seemed determined to help them do exactly that. "Go ahead," he said again, tapping the card against the glass display. "I am serious. She obviously needs the help." A few customers exchanged glances. One older man shook his head slightly, though it was impossible to tell whether he disapproved of Brandon or Jasmine. A woman near the stroller section whispered something to her friend while looking directly at Jasmine's pregnancy. The quiet conversation spread through the boutique like ripples across water. Jasmine had experienced that look before. The look people gave when they believed they understood your life after observing only a few seconds of it. Brandon's girlfriend stepped closer and folded her arms. "Honestly, this is embarrassing," she said. "If someone offered me a $12,000 gift, I would at least say thank you." Brandon smiled as if he had already won. He expected anger. He expected tears. He expected Jasmine to defend herself. Instead, she simply stood there with one hand resting gently against her stomach. The calmness in her expression only made him more determined to provoke a reaction. "You know," he said loudly, "I always tried to help her. That was my mistake. Some people never learn how the real world works." The words were cruel, but Jasmine barely reacted. Months ago, they might have broken her. Months ago, she might have gone home and cried herself to sleep replaying every insult. But life had taught her something valuable. People who constantly announced their importance were usually trying to convince themselves. Across the boutique, two employees stood near the register watching the scene unfold. One of them quietly leaned toward the other. "Do you think she can actually afford that crib?" she whispered. The question was soft, but Jasmine heard it anyway. The words stung more than she wanted to admit. Not because of the assumption itself, but because it reminded her how quickly strangers measured human worth through appearances. Her handbag was simple. Her dress was modest. She wore no visible designer labels. To many people, that was enough evidence. Brandon noticed the employees watching and grew even more confident. "See," he said, "everyone understands what is happening except you." The sales associate opened her mouth as though she wanted to say something, then stopped herself. At that exact moment, Jasmine's phone vibrated softly inside her purse. The sound seemed unusually loud in the silence. She glanced at the screen. A small smile touched her lips for the first time since Brandon arrived. Then she answered the call. Her voice remained calm and gentle. "Hi." She listened for a few seconds. "Yes, everything is fine." Another pause. Her smile deepened slightly. "Do not worry. I am okay." Brandon rolled his eyes. To him, it sounded like an ordinary conversation. To everyone else, it sounded insignificant. But something about the warmth that appeared in Jasmine's expression made the older woman near the stroller section look at her more carefully than before. And for the first time since entering the boutique, Jasmine no longer looked like someone standing alone. Jasmine ended the call and gently slipped her phone back into her purse. The smile remained on her face for only a moment before she returned to her calm expression. Brandon noticed it immediately. Something about that brief smile irritated him. He had spent the last several minutes trying to embarrass her, yet she refused to break. "What is so funny?" he asked. Jasmine looked at him. "Nothing." The answer was simple, but it only made him more frustrated. Around them, the boutique remained unusually quiet. Customers pretended to browse while secretly listening. Employees organized displays that did not need organizing. Everyone sensed that something important was unfolding, even if they could not explain why. Brandon's girlfriend rolled her eyes. She probably called someone to come rescue her. A few people laughed softly. Jasmine did not respond. The sales associate glanced toward the front entrance and then back at Jasmine. There was uncertainty in her eyes now. The longer this situation continued, the less certain she felt about the story Brandon was trying to sell. People who were truly desperate rarely carried themselves with such quiet confidence. Brandon stepped closer to the crib again. "You know what I think," he said. "I think you came here hoping someone would feel sorry for you." Jasmine slowly shook her head. "You are wrong." Brandon smiled. "Then explain it." "I do not owe anyone an explanation." The answer landed harder than any argument could have. Several customers exchanged surprised looks. For the first time, Brandon seemed momentarily caught off guard. He was used to controlling conversations. He was used to making other people react. Jasmine's refusal to play along felt like losing a game he thought he had already won. Before he could reply, movement near the entrance drew attention from several employees. An older Korean man wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit stepped into the boutique. He appeared to be in his 60s, carrying himself with effortless authority. The moment the store manager noticed him, her entire posture changed. She hurried forward immediately. "Good afternoon, Mr. Choi," she said respectfully. The employees near the registers straightened almost instantly. Brandon noticed the reaction and lowered his voice. "Who is that?" Nobody answered him. Mr. Choi calmly surveyed the boutique. His eyes moved across the displays before stopping on Jasmine. The change in his expression was immediate. Respect, recognition, warmth. He walked forward with measured steps. The store manager followed closely behind him. Several employees looked confused. Others suddenly appeared nervous. Brandon frowned. Something no longer felt right. Mr. Choi stopped a few feet from Jasmine and offered a small bow of his head. "Mrs. Park," he said politely, "I apologize if you have been waiting long." The words seemed to freeze the air itself. The store manager's eyes widened. The sales associate blinked. Brandon's confident smile vanished. "Mrs. Park," he repeated quietly. Jasmine gave a gentle smile. "Not long at all, Mr. Choi." The older man nodded. "Good. Everything has been prepared exactly as requested." No one understood what that meant. But suddenly the assumptions filling the room began to crack. Brandon looked from Jasmine to Mr. Choi and back again. For the first time since entering the boutique, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. And somewhere deep inside, a feeling he had not expected began to grow. Doubt. Ethan Park was still several minutes away, but inside the boutique, the atmosphere had already changed. Brandon could feel it. The confidence that had carried him through the afternoon was beginning to slip through his fingers. Mr. Choi's presence alone had shifted the balance of the room. Employees who had been whispering moments earlier now stood straighter. The store manager's expression had transformed from polite professionalism into careful attention. Brandon forced a laugh. "Mrs. Park," he repeated. "That sounds impressive." Nobody joined him. The silence that followed felt heavier than any response. Jasmine simply stood beside the nursery display, calm as ever. She had not corrected anyone. She had not explained herself. She had not tried to impress a single person in the room. Yet somehow she had become the center of attention without making any effort at all. Mr. Choi turned toward the manager. "Has the private collection been prepared?" he asked. "Yes, sir," the manager answered immediately. "Everything is ready." Brandon frowned. "Private collection?" The manager ignored him completely. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. His entire life, people had paid attention when he spoke. They laughed at his jokes. They listened to his opinions. Now it was as if he had become invisible. Mr. Choi checked his watch and nodded slightly. "Excellent. Mrs. Park should not have to wait any longer." Several employees exchanged nervous glances. The sales associate who had watched the confrontation earlier suddenly seemed uncomfortable. She remembered every assumption she had made, every doubt, every quiet judgment. Across the boutique, the older customer who had been observing Jasmine all afternoon smiled softly. She had seen enough of life to recognize true confidence. It rarely arrived with noise. Brandon's girlfriend stepped closer to him. "What is going on?" she whispered. "I do not know," Brandon admitted. The answer surprised even him. He hated not knowing. He hated uncertainty. Most of all, he hated the growing realization that he might have misunderstood the situation completely. Then the elevator at the far end of the boutique opened. It was not the public elevator customers normally used. This one was hidden behind a polished marble wall reserved for private access. The quiet sound drew every eye in the store. Two men in dark suits stepped out first. Their expressions were calm and professional. They did not look around nervously. They did not need to. They moved with the confidence of people who knew exactly why they were there. Behind them came another man, older, distinguished, carrying a folder against his chest. The manager's face immediately turned pale with anticipation. Brandon felt his pulse quicken. Something important was happening. Something much larger than a simple shopping trip. More employees began appearing from the back offices. Even staff members who normally remained hidden suddenly found reasons to be near the showroom floor. Jasmine glanced toward the elevator and smiled gently, as though she had been expecting all of this from the beginning. That smile unsettled Brandon more than anything else. Because for the first time all afternoon, he realized she was not surprised by any of it. She was simply waiting. And somewhere beyond those elevator doors, the reason for her confidence was about to walk into the room. Ethan Park stepped out of the private elevator, and the entire boutique seemed to exhale at once. He was dressed simply in a tailored black suit, his dark hair neatly styled, his expression calm and unreadable. There was nothing loud about his appearance, nothing flashy, yet the effect was immediate. Employees who had been standing comfortably a moment earlier straightened their posture. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even customers who had no idea who he was instinctively moved aside. True authority rarely needed an introduction. It announced itself without words. Ethan acknowledged no one at first. Not the manager. Not the employees rushing to greet him. Not the executives who had emerged from the back offices. His attention moved across the room until it found Jasmine. The change in his expression was subtle, almost invisible. But it was there. Warmth replaced distance. Concern replaced formality. And suddenly the powerful man everyone seemed eager to impress looked only at her. Jasmine smiled softly. The tension she had carried throughout the afternoon eased from her shoulders. Ethan crossed the showroom floor without hesitation. The store manager hurried forward. "Mr. Park, welcome back," she said. Ethan offered a polite nod, but did not slow down. Brandon stared in confusion. "Park," he whispered. The name sounded familiar. Too familiar. His girlfriend glanced between the employees and Ethan. "Who was he?" she asked. Nobody answered. Nobody seemed interested in answering. Ethan stopped directly in front of Jasmine. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt strangely personal amid the crowded boutique. Then Ethan gently reached for her hand. "I am sorry I was delayed," he said. His voice was calm and sincere. "The meeting took longer than expected." Jasmine shook her head. "It is fine." Ethan's eyes moved to her face. He noticed the faint redness around her eyes, the tightness she was trying to hide, the emotional exhaustion behind her calm smile. His expression grew more serious. "Has everything been all right?" he asked quietly. Jasmine hesitated. Before she could answer, Brandon stepped forward. "Wait a second." Every head turned toward him. Ethan looked at Brandon for the first time. There was no hostility in his gaze. No anger. Only polite curiosity, as though noticing someone standing nearby. Brandon suddenly found that far more unsettling than open confrontation. "You know her?" Brandon asked. Ethan glanced back toward Jasmine and then returned his attention to him. "Of course." The answer was simple. Confident. Certain. Brandon forced a nervous laugh. "How?" Ethan looked genuinely surprised by the question. He gently lifted Jasmine's hand and held it between both of his. "She is my wife." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Silence spread outward in every direction. The manager froze. The sales associate's eyes widened. Several customers openly gasped. Brandon's girlfriend stared at Jasmine in disbelief. Brandon himself said nothing at all. He simply stood there, trying to process what he had just heard. Because in a single sentence, the story he had spent all afternoon telling everyone had completely fallen apart. The silence that followed seemed to stretch across the entire boutique. Brandon stared at Jasmine as though seeing her for the first time. His mind searched desperately for an explanation that would make sense of what he had just heard, but none came. Ethan, meanwhile, appeared completely uninterested in the reaction around him. His attention remained on his wife. "You look tired," he said gently. "Have you been standing long?" Jasmine smiled. "I am fine." Ethan glanced toward the crib she had been examining earlier. His eyes moved from the display to the price tag, and then back to her face. He immediately noticed something else as well. The atmosphere. The uncomfortable expressions. The lingering tension hanging in the room. Years of experience had taught him how to read people long before they spoke. "Did something happen?" he asked quietly. Jasmine hesitated. She had no desire to embarrass anyone, no desire for revenge. That was simply not who she was. But before she could answer, the sales associate stepped forward. Her face had turned pale. "Sir," she began nervously, "there seems to have been a misunderstanding." Ethan listened without interrupting. The young woman lowered her eyes. Mrs. Park was treated unfairly. The words fell heavily into the silence. Brandon felt every gaze in the boutique shift toward him. For the first time all afternoon, he had no clever response ready. No joke. No performance. Ethan looked at Jasmine again. He noticed the faint sadness she was trying to hide beneath her composure. That was enough. He did not ask for details. He did not demand explanations. He simply understood. Mr. Choi stepped forward holding a leather folder. "Sir," he said respectfully, "the nursery collection has been prepared." Ethan nodded. "Good." Then he turned toward the store manager. "I would like everything my wife selected delivered tomorrow." The manager immediately responded. "Of course, Mr. Park." Ethan glanced around the showroom. "And include anything she may have considered but decided not to purchase." Several employees exchanged stunned looks. The manager quickly nodded again. "Absolutely." Brandon swallowed hard. The crib he had mocked. The purchase he had turned into a public spectacle. It suddenly meant nothing. Ethan had not asked about the price once. Not because money was unimportant, but because his focus had never been on the items. It had been on Jasmine. Brandon's girlfriend slowly stepped away from him. The distance was subtle, but impossible to miss. She had spent the afternoon laughing at Jasmine. Now she avoided eye contact entirely. Ethan finally looked directly at Brandon. The boutique became so quiet that even the soft music seemed distant. Brandon braced himself for anger, for humiliation, for some display of power. Instead, Ethan spoke calmly. "A person's character is revealed by how they treat someone who has nothing to offer them." His voice never rose. Respect should not depend on wealth, appearance, or circumstance. Brandon lowered his eyes. The words hit harder than any public argument could have. Because deep down, he knew they were true. Ethan returned his attention to Jasmine and gently placed a hand over hers. In that moment, everyone in the boutique understood something Brandon had failed to see. The strongest person in the room had never been the one speaking the loudest. It had been the woman who endured every insult without surrendering her dignity. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The boutique that had been filled with whispers, laughter, and judgment now stood completely silent. Brandon remained frozen beside the display he had used as a stage only minutes earlier. The confidence that once seemed so effortless had disappeared. In its place stood a man confronting the consequences of his own assumptions. Ethan never looked back at him again. The conversation was over. The lesson had already been delivered. Jasmine felt a gentle warmth as Ethan kept her hand in his. It was not the warmth of wealth or status. It was something far more valuable. Security, respect, partnership. Things she had once prayed for during lonely nights when the future felt uncertain. Mr. Choi opened the folder and reviewed a few final details regarding the nursery collection. The manager personally escorted several employees to begin preparing arrangements. Their attitude toward Jasmine had changed completely. Yet Jasmine noticed something important. The respect she was receiving now should have been given long before anyone knew who she was married to. That thought stayed with her. The older customer who had quietly observed the entire situation approached before leaving the store. She smiled warmly at Jasmine. "Congratulations on your growing family," she said. Jasmine smiled back. "Thank you." The woman glanced briefly toward Brandon and then returned her attention to Jasmine. "Never let anyone make you question your worth." With that, she walked away. The simple words carried more weight than she realized. Brandon lowered his eyes. He remembered the woman he had abandoned months earlier. The woman he assumed would always struggle. The woman he believed he had outgrown. Yet standing before him now was someone stronger than he had ever understood. Not because of who she married. Not because of money. But because she had endured disappointment without becoming bitter. She had faced hardship without losing her kindness. His girlfriend quietly stepped toward the exit. "I think I am going to leave," she said. Brandon did not stop her. He barely seemed to hear her. Jasmine could have humiliated him. She could have listed every mistake he had made. She could have enjoyed watching him stand there embarrassed in front of everyone. Instead, she simply looked at him with calm eyes and said, "I hope you find happiness, Brandon." Nothing more. No anger. No revenge. The words stunned him more than any insult ever could. Ethan guided Jasmine toward the private elevator. Before they stepped inside, he glanced at the crib one final time. "Do you still like that one?" he asked. Jasmine laughed softly. "I do." "Then that is the one our child should have." The elevator doors opened. Together they stepped inside. The doors slowly closed, leaving the boutique behind. As the elevator disappeared from view, people began returning to their conversations. Employees resumed their work. Customers continued shopping. Life moved forward. But Brandon remained standing exactly where he was. Because some lessons arrive quietly. Some lessons do not require punishment. They simply reveal the truth. And the truth Brandon learned that afternoon was one he would remember for the rest of his life. Wealth can impress people. Power can influence people. But dignity earns something far more lasting. And that day, everyone in the room remembered what dignity looks like.